Hey, so this is an unscheduled weekend social distancing story time where I've got some pretty good beach hair. We were at the beach this morning and it's kind of crummy weather now, and we just got a warning that our library books are due back at the library in the next couple days. So I thought, well, might as well get in a story time recording. You don't have to watch it live, you can watch it whenever. All right, so let's start in. I don't think I've read this one yet. Burt Dow, Deep Water Man by Robert McCloskey. We love Robert McCloskey. He wrote Make Way for Ducklings, Blueberries for Sal, One Morning in Maine. Some classics. Burt Dow was an old deep water man, retired of course, but retired or not, he still keeps two boats. One is a dory so old and so leaky that it can no longer be launched. Burt has painted it red and placed it on a little patch of lawn in front of his house overlooking the bay. He's rigged it like one of the many ships he's sailed to all the corners of all the seven seas. It's filled plumb to the gunnels with earth, and every summer Burt plants it with geraniums and Indian peas. The geraniums brighten up the deck, and the Indian peas climb the rigging and sway this away and that away in a smoky sou'wester. The other boat is an old double-ender named Tiddly Idly, with a make-and-break engine. This boat leaks too, except when it's pulled up on shore for caulking, patching, and painting, which is most of the time. She's a good boat, says Burt, patting her on the stern and giving her propeller an affectionate kick. She's got a few tender places in her planking, but you can't see the daylight through her nowheres. The Tiddly Idly is the pride and joy of Burt's life, and between odd jobs for natives and summer people, he keeps her painted and patched as best he can. Every time he does a paint job, he brings home the leftover paint and uses it on the Tiddly Idly. That pink plank, he says, is the color of Ginny Poy's pantry, and the green one is the color of the floors and doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. And there's the tan porch on the trim color from Captain Haskell's house. Burt Dow has a sister named Leela, who keeps house for him, cooks the lobsters and fish he catches and the clams he digs. She feeds the cock, she feeds the hens, she tends the garden, and she helps Burt keep down the weeds in the dory full of geraniums and Indian peas. Leela is a very impatient person. Most impatient being on land or sea, says Burt, as he hustles about doing this or that so as not to keep her waiting. Mornings, when the cock crows cockity-doodly, Leela is already down in the kitchen, rattling her stove lids, clinkety-clink, and shouting, "Hit the deck, Burt! Time to eat!" And Burt, winking and blinking his eyelids, comes stumbling down the stairs to breakfast so as not to keep Leela waiting. Burt Dow has a giggling gull for a pet. Every morning, she roosts on the roof of the shed where Burt keeps his fishing gear. The gull giggles, tee-hee-hee-hee, until Burt comes out and tosses her a pancake or a popover, or sometimes a piece of cinnamon toast. When Burt Dow puts out to sea in the Tiddly Idly, everybody in town knows it. They hear him pump out all the water that has leaked in overnight. Slish-ka-slosh, slish-ka-slosh. Then there's a pause while Burt checks the tenderest spot between the pink plank, the color of Ginny Poy's pantry, and the green plank, the color of the floor and doors on Doc Walton's waiting room. Then they hear him start the make-and-break engine, clackety-bang, clackety-bang, and they see him, firm hand on the tiller, giggling gull flying along behind, heading out of the cove, and going clackety-bangety down the bay. One morning, the cock crowed cockity-doodly, and Leela rattled her stove lids, clinkety-clink, shouting, "Hit the deck, Burt! Time to eat!" And Burt came downstairs, winking and blinking his sleepy eyelids, and ate his breakfast. He tossed the giggling gull a popover, tee-hee-hee-hee, and went down to the cove to pump out the Tiddly Idly, slish-ka-slosh, slish-ka-slosh. He gently felt the tenderest spot between the pink plank, the color of Ginny Poy's pantry, and the green plank, the color of the floor and doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. "Giggling gull," he said sadly, "'twon't be long before the Tiddly Idly gets planted with geraniums and Indian peas." Then he started the make and break, clackety-bang, clackety-bang, and firm hand on the tiller, giggling gull flying along behind, he headed out of the cove, going clackety-bangety down the bay to fish for cod. Burt kept studying the color of the sky, the color of the water, and the direction of the wind. It's getting hot in here. I need to take my sweatshirt off. Oh boy, can't get it unzipped. There we go. it is humid here today. All right. An old deep-water man like me, always keeps a weather eye out, said Burt. But he keeps 2 weather eyes out when he puts out to sea in a vessel as old and leaky as the Tiddly Idly. It looked like a good day, so Burt took the Tiddly Idly way out to the end of the bay and into the open sea. He shut off the make-and-break engine and let the boat drift on the gentle swell. Then he baited up his hook with clams and lowered it over the side to fish for cod. Burt didn't get any bites, not even a teeny-weeny nibble. So he cranked up the make-and-break and moved the Tiddly Idly to another spot. But there were no fish there either. He didn't even pull up a pollock or a sculpin. There must be something down there frightening those fish, Burt confided to the giggling gull. Tee-hee-hee-hee, the giggling gull agreed. Then Burt felt a substantial sort of a tug on his line that almost, but not quite, pulled him over the side. Then Burt pulled, and then Burt tugged. He heaved, and he tugged. He grunted and groaned until the Tiddly Idly practically stood on end. But he couldn't haul in even a single stitch of line. Must be caught on the bottom, said Burt. Tee-hee-hee-hee! The giggling gull was much amused, and she teetered on the tip of the tiller to see what would happen next. Well, Burt, so it seemed, finally got his line uncaught from the bottom and was hauling it in a moderate sort of way, not paying much attention, to see if he needed more bait. The giggling gull was teetering to and fro at the tip of the tiller and tittering tee-hee-hee-hee now and then in a nervous sort of way. She might have noticed something or other that for that particular moment hadn't come to Burt's attention, but the very next moment it came to Burt's attention, and he pulled up a whale of a tail. Have you ever seen anything like that? Or 'twas t'other way around. The tail of the whale had pulled up Burt. Burt grabbed the pump handle and hung on while he swung around this away, that away. The giggling gull teetered on the tip of the tiller and laughed fit to split. Burt finally slacked up on the line, or 'twas the other way around. Finally, the tail slacked up on the line, but then the tail began to thrash about this away, that away, in such a manner as to call Burt's attention to the fact that there was a whale on the other end of it. "Ahoy there, whale!" bellowed Burt. "Hold your horses, keep your shirt on, head into the wind and slack off the main sheet." The whale couldn't hear because his hearing gear was so far upwind from his steering gear that he had come afoul of Burt's cod hook. "Ahoy there, you giggling gull!" shouted Burt. "Fly away down there and tell this whale that this vessel has a couple of tender places in her palanking. He's about to stave us in and send the Tiddly Idly and all hands straight to Davy Jones' locker." The barb of Burt's cod hook was barely caught in the blubber of the tail, and since it didn't hurt, the whale quieted down and allowed Burt to haul in his cod line cautiously so that he could remove the hook. When the tail came within reach, Burt had his pliers ready. Working ever so carefully so as not to tickle, he snipped off the barb and eased out the hook. "And now," said Burt, "only a little bit of a hole, and I've got just the thing for that." He reached down in the bottom of his toolkit and brought out a box of Band-Aids Doc Walton had given him, just in case a lobster ever took a nip out of a finger. They were decorated with peppermint stripes, and fortunately, they were the kind that stick to anything, even whales' tails. "And now, Captain Whale," said Burt proudly, "I'll wager your rudder won't leak out any blubber or take aboard any water and get waterlogged now." Just then, ka-smack! A whopping big wave caught the Tiddly Idly in a very embarrassing position and jolted her to the bottom of her keel all the way from prow to propeller. Burt had forgotten to keep his weather eyes out, what with getting this poor whale out of the trouble he was in, and hadn't noticed that it was beginning to blow. Tip of his tail snagged on a cod hook, all his blub about to dribble out through the hole. Burt started the make-and-break engine and managed to head the Tiddly Idly into the wind, but he knew he'd never make it home. However, he did make it to the leeward side of the whale, and with a firm hand on the tiller, Giggling Gull flying along behind, headed chuggity-bangity up to the bow of the whale to have a face-to-face talk. "It's blowing a gale of a wind, whale," bellowed Burt, coming right to the point. "And one good turn deserves another. The Tiddly Idly's taking aboard water between those 2 tender planks. I'm a-pumping just as fast as I can pump, but the water's above the floorboards. About to stall the make and break. I'm afeard this vessel and all hands aboard are headed for Davy Jones' locker. No doubt the tiddly-iddly would taste terrible, Burt went on, still coming right to the point, and her barnacled bottom would smart your tongue well. The make and break would taste bitter as bile, and me, an old deep-water man in oilskins and boats, along with this giggling gull, would make gosh-awful trimmings for any meal. But, pleaded Burt, couldn't you just sort of swallow us, temporary, of course, while this gale of wind blows itself out? The whale gave a little snort and didn't say anything. Apparently, this was a whale of few words. He just opened his mouth wide and said, in the classic tradition. Burt set the throttle of the make and break it wide open and chug-a-bang, firm hand on the tiller, Giggle and Gull flying along behind, guided the tiddly-iddly into the whale's mouth and navigated the length of the gullet and into the whale's tummy without so much as touching a tonsil on the way down. Well, said Burt, I naturally expected it to be dark inside a whale's tummy, but I didn't expect it to be as dark as this. A few portholes for light and ventilation would improve the design of this animal. His idea struck the giggling gull as funny, and she started giggling again. Burt was bending over and bumbling about in the dark, trying to find his lantern. He bumped his head on the make and break and yelled, Out of my way, you chuggity-bangatified batch of old iron! Tee-hee-hee! This made the giggling gull laugh fit to split. Gull, Burt said testily, someday I'll gaggle you. I never realized until now how limited your vocabulary is. You'd be a poor companion to be shipwrecked on a sunny desert island with. You're even worse in dry dock. Down in this dark, damp tummy of a whale, if I had my choice, I'd take a dictionary every time. Burt had found the lantern and was feeling around, trying to find a dry spot on which to strike a match when he had a very disquieting thought. Suppose this whale didn't hear every word I said out there in that gale of a wind, he asked. What if he doesn't understand the English language red letter perfect? Or maybe he's absent-minded. He might not know or remember that we're supposed to be temporary guests, so to speak. Yup, Giggle and Gull, Burt continued, we'll have to make sure we get ourselves unswallowed. He finally struck a match, used the seat of his pants. Well, he said as the light flared up, I naturally expected pink would be the color of this whale's tummy, but I wasn't prepared for pink identical with the pink in Ginny Poor's pantry. Yup, like a big pink cave, that's what it is. Burt checked over his boat and found that the spot where the wave had slapped the tiddly-iddly on her tender bottom would need considerable caulking, patching, and painting. In fact, the water that only moments before had leaked from the ocean into the tiddly-iddly was now leaking the other way around, out of the tiddly-iddly and on the pink deck of the whale's tummy. After Burt finished his caulking, patching, and painting, he said, "'Tain't perfect, but she'll hold until we get home, I hope." Giggle and Gull, we have to get busy. Leila's back home, rattling her stove lids and getting impatient over our not being home in time to eat. First of all, Burt tugged and shoved until he got the tiddly-iddly turned about so that her bow pointed in the right direction. Then he systematically set about trying to give the whale an upset tummy. Whales has got strong stomachs, Burt explained to the giggling gull, and it takes more than a mixture of ketchup and ice cream, pickles and peppermint, mince pie and mustard to call their attention to the fact that their tummy's upset. He began by pumping out the tiddly-iddly to the very bottom of the bilge. In an old boat, that always produces a lot of interesting things, such as old crab claws, clams, bait, rusty fish hooks, a can opener, corroded pieces of brass, all mixed in with a nice big helping of sediment. Burt started scooping up the sediment in the end of a piece of shingle and began flipping a little gob here, a little gob there, making big splatter spots on the lining of the tummy. The tummy began to quiver like. Began to quiver like a horse's flanks, flicking off flies. Then Burt opened a leftover can of yellow deck paint and started sloshing it around, dribbling a little bit here, a little bit there. He was beginning to enjoy himself, probably because it was the first time he'd ever had a chance to really express his personality in paint. Next, he took a can of cup grease and, with the shingle, started splattering a few accents here and there. By now, the whale's tummy was all a-quivering. It disturbed Burt's aim a bit, and he misplaced a few blobs of cup grease. Well, the tummy began to make rumbling noises and flip a lot this away, flip a lot that away, and Burt knew right off that it would take only the littlest touch to make the tummy break loose from its moorings and get upset. He, quick as he could, jumped into the tiddly-iddly and started the make and break. Chuckity-bang, chuckity-bang. Giggle and Gull, he shouted, wiggle your wings and fly up to the forward hatchway and tickle this whale's throat with a feather. Of course, the exhaust and jiggling of the make and break helped, but 'twas the tickle that turned the trick. With the dark, dampest rumble ever heard, the big tummy flipped this away, that away, and then, with a wail of a burp, Boat and Burt, firm hand on the tiller, Giggle and Gull flying along behind, make and break going wide open, came clackety-bang out of the wide open mouth of the whale, going so fast that they barely touched the tops of the first two waves and landed right dab smack in the middle of a whole school of whales. Burt eased up on the throttle of the make and break and tried to steer a snug course between two whale tails, one the color of Ginny Poor's pantry, t'other the color of the floors and doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. But the way was blocked by a whale tail the color of the porch and tram on Captain Haskell's house. Every time Burt shifted course, there seemed to be more whale tails in the way. Finally, Burt stopped the make and break and let the tiddly-iddly drift among the whale tails while he decided what to do next. He bobbed around in his boat, studying the situation. When he took out his glass and studied some more, then he finally said, well, that's a whale of a lot of whale tails, making what amounted to a classic understatement. You can hardly see the forest for the trees, Burt complained, or the whales for the tails. There must be some reason, thought Burt, why all this school of whales are waving their tails toward the tiddly-iddly. All except one, he added, peeping through his glass at a pale whale that looked exactly as though it had an upset tummy from a bit of bilge water, cup grease, deck paint, and having its throat tickled by a feather. Yep, that whale looks a bit under the weather, but it also looks contented. But meanwhile, the rest of the school of whales seemed to be getting impatient. They twitched the tips of their tails and whacked them down on the water. Careful, bellowed Burt. The tiddly-iddly's got a tender spot and you're apt to spring a steam. If first you don't swat us like a fly, which is no fit way for an old deep-water man and his vessel to go to Davy Jones. What with the tiddly-iddly's regular leaks and all the water being splashed aboard by impatient whale tails, Burt had to keep pumping slish-ka-slosh, and he didn't have much time to wonder what made one whale contented and what made all the rest of the school so slap-happy with their tails. Do you have any guesses? Let's see. Stronger and younger men might have given up, but not our deep-water man Burt Dow. He kept right on pumping with one hand, slish-ka-slosh, while he poked around in his toolbox with the other. Still pumping, slish-ka-slosh, he pulled out a Band-Aid, unfurled it from its wrappings between his teeth, and slapped it on the tip of the nearest whale tail. Burt knew right off that his troubles were over. The whales were only impatient at my taking so long to understand 'em, Burt explained to the Giggle and Gull. Whales is really very patient about standing a swimming in line to have the tips of their tails decked out with a Band-Aid. Do you think that's true? I don't know. After all the whale tails had been decorated, each with a peppermint-striped Band-Aid, the entire school swam, tails held high, in a tremendous circle around the tiddly-iddly. An old deep-water man like Burt couldn't resist shouting, "Thar she blows!" in the best classic tradition. Then, all together, 1, 2, 3, the school of whales blew 3 big blows for Burt Dow and swam off over the horizon. "I never did see," said Burt, "so many tons of contentment come out of such a little old Band-Aid box." He still had one Band-Aid left, and he knew that he'd never need it himself. Never was a lobster hatched or catched as could ever clamp a claw on Burt Dow. So just for a joke, he said, "Giggle and Gull, let's take this last Band-Aid home to Leela." "Tee-hee-hee-hee," giggled the Gull, because she always was one who enjoyed Burt's little jokes. "And would better take it right now," said Burt, "so's not to keep her waiting." But then he noticed that the water was up over the floorboards, so he started pumping again. Slish-ka-slosh, slish-ka-slosh. Then he cranked the make and break, clackety-bang, clackety-bang. And with the firm hand on the tiller, Giggle and Gull flying along behind, he headed the tiddly-iddly back up the bay. They made it home just as the cock began to crow. Have you ever heard such a story? I don't know if we can believe old Robert McCloskey about Burt Dow, the deep water man. and putting band-aids on whales' tails in a teeny little motorboat. I don't know if I'd be brave enough to do that. I have seen whales before, though, on a big boat, on a whale watching boat. Have you ever done that? It's pretty fun. Okay, let's read another Paul Goble. This is Mystic Horse. And this book, let's see. So this says, the ancient domain of the Pawnee people was within the present states of Nebraska and northern Kansas. There are places which they greatly venerated, certain hills, rocky cliffs, springs of water, lakes, and caves. Tradition told that these sacred places were the doorways to the underground lodges of Naharok, the spirit birds and animals and all other living things waiting to be born. From season to season, Tirawahat, God, would cause the Naharok to populate the earth. It had always been that way. So this is a story from the Pawnee Indians. All of Paul Goble's books are Native American legends that he illustrates and retells. We read a lot of them a couple of weeks ago. And this is the last one that we have from the library. This says, long ago in the Pawnee village, there was a man who dearly loved his horse. But when the man died, his horse was no longer cared for and was continually passed from one person to another. A friend of the man who had died dreamed that he saw the dead man sitting with the drummers, singing about his beloved horse. When he awoke, he remembered the words, and the song soon became popular among the Pawnee people. Abandoned, lonely, unloved. Abandoned, lonely, unloved. Abandoned, lonely, unloved. Our Father above says there is an old horse in our midst who is without an owner, abandoned, lonely, unloved. In those long ago days when the Pawnee people had harvested their crops of corn and squash, they would leave their Earth Lodge villages and travel out on the Great Plains to hunt buffalo. They had horses to ride and to carry their teepees and belongings when they went great distances in search of the wandering herds. When they were not traveling and the teepees were pitched, it was the responsibility of the older boys, the young men, to look after the herds of horses and to guard the village. They would stay with the horses at pasture throughout the day, often far away from the camp. All the while they would keep a good lookout for enemies. Traveling with the people were an old woman and her grandson. They were poor, living alone without any relatives at the edge of the village. Their only shelter was made of sticks and a patchwork of pieces of old teepee covers which people had thrown away. Nobody took much notice of them. When the people moved from one camping place to another, the old woman and her grandson would stay behind to look for scraps of food and to pick up discarded clothes. They had no horse. They walked, and what the dogs could not carry, they packed on their own backs. Their life was hard, but they were happy. One day, as they followed far behind the village, they came upon a sad and sickly worn-out horse standing in the trail. He was terribly thin, with sores on his back. Grandmother, the boy said, nobody wants this poor old horse. If we are kind and look after him, he will get well again. He will help us carry our packs. Then I will be able to join the buffalo hunt, and we will have meat and fresh skins as well. And so they led the old horse limping along behind them. People laughed. You've got yourself a great war horse, boy. How will we keep up with you now? But the boy loved his horse and looked after him well. And after some days had passed, the boys who were out on the hills looking after the horses spotted enemies approaching on horseback. They quickly drove the herds back to the safety of the camp. The men grabbed their weapons, mounted their fastest horses, and rode out to meet the enemy. The boy, riding the poor old horse, followed shyly at a distance. But the men pointed at the horse and laughed. Look, here's the one who'll leave us all behind. Boy, that's an old good-for-nothing, half-starved horse. You'll be killed. Go back home. The boy, ashamed, rode off to one side, where he could not hear their unkind remarks. The horse turned his head and spoke to the boy. Listen to me. Take me down to the river and cover me with mud. The boy was alarmed to hear him speak, but without hesitation he rode to the river and daubed mud all over the horse. Then the horse spoke again. Don't take your bow and arrows. Cut a long willow stick instead. Then ride me as hard as you can right into the enemy's midst and strike their leader with the stick and ride back again. Do it 4 times and the enemy will be afraid. but do not do it more than 4 times. While the horse was speaking, he was tossing his head, stamping and prancing this way and that, until the boy could hardly hold him back. He loosened the reins, and the horse galloped toward the enemy. He was no longer an old, sickly, worn-out horse. He flew like a hawk, right to where the enemy's riders were formed up in a line of battle. The boy struck their leader with his willow stick, turned, and rode back to his people with arrows flying past him like angry wasps. He turned again without stopping, and the horse carried him back to strike another enemy rider. By then, his people were cheering loudly. 4 times the boy charged back and forth, and each time he hit one of the enemy, just as his horse had told him. The men watched the boy with amazement. Now, they too felt brave enough to follow his example, and they drove the enemy in full retreat from the village. It was like chasing buffalo. The boy was eager to join the chase. He said to himself, "I have struck 4 times, and I have not been hurt. I will do it once more." Uh-oh, but what did the horse say? And so, again, he rode after the retreating enemy riders. He whipped another with his stick, but at that very instant his horse was pierced by an arrow and fell. The horse tried to stand, but he could not. When the enemy had fled, the men returned and gathered round the boy. His horse was dead. They wanted to touch the horse, for they knew he had been no ordinary one, but a horse with mystic powers. The leader spoke. "Today this boy has shown us that he is braver than all of us. From now on we will call him Piraski Resaru, boy chief." But the boy cried. He was sad for his horse and angry with himself that he had not done what the mysterious horse had told him. He untied the lariat, pulled out the arrow, and carefully wiped away the blood. He climbed to the top of a nearby hill to mourn. He sat on a rock and pulled his blanket over his head. While he sat there crying, fearsome dark clouds closed across the sky, and it grew dark as if night was falling. Lightning flashed. Thunder shook the hilltop, and it rained with a terrific downpour. Looking through the downpour, he imagined he saw the dead horse move his legs a little, and that he even tried to lift his head. He wondered if something strange and wonderful was happening. And then he knew it was true. The horse slowly stretched out his front legs and then stood up. The boy was a little afraid, but he ran down from the hilltop and clasped his arms round the horse's neck, crying with joy that he was alive again. The horse spoke softly to him. "Tirawahat, our Father above is good. He has forgiven you. He has let me come back to you." The storm passed, the rain stopped. All was still and fresh, and the sun shone brilliantly on his beautiful living horse. "Now take me up into the hills, far away from people," the horse told him. "Leave me there for 4 days, and then come for me." When the 4 days had passed, Boy Chief left the village and climbed into the pine trees. A horse neighed, but the mysterious horse appeared, followed by a herd of spirited horses. They surrounded Boy Chief, snorting and stamping excitedly, horses of every color, beautiful bays, chestnuts, shiny blacks, whites, grays, and paints. Mounted on his mysterious horse, Boy Chief drove the horses round and round the village. He stopped in front of his grandmother's shelter. "Grandmother," he said, "now you will always have horses. You need never walk again. Choose the ones you want and give the rest to those who need them most." And so it was done. After that, the boy and his grandmother rode whenever they moved camp. They lived in a teepee and were not poor any longer. And just as his grandmother had looked after him when he was young, so he too always took good care of her after all her years. The legend tells that Piraski Resaru, Boy Chief, never made the wonderful horse work, but that he loved to ride him on special occasions. He would paint lightning streaks down the horse's legs, because he could run faster than any horse, and he would tie eagle feathers in his mane and tail, for the honors won defending the village. Then horse and rider would share the wonder and the beauty around them, the ground beneath and the sky above. Ah, yes, people would say, it is good to see Boy Chief and his mystic horse.
And that's the story of the Mystic Horse. Those 2 books were pretty long, so I think we'll end there today. We might try and sneak in another story tomorrow if it's a rainy day, because we have a few more books that we haven't read. Some of them are pretty long. We've got Front Porch Tales and North Country Whoppers by Tommy DePaola, and a couple of the Homer Price books by Robert McCloskey, which are kind of long, almost like chapter books. So we'll try and be back soon before we take these books back to the library. Thanks for joining us for Social Distancing Storytime. Bye.